Kissing him put a literal target on my back, and the city's deadliest gangs are now hunting me. I didn't know. Dante Caruso ran an illegal empire when I pressed my lips to his at that party. I just thought he looked like a guy who could break kneecaps. Turns out I was absolutely right. Now, rival crime families see me as his ultimate weakness, and I have a literal hacker tracking my every move to keep me breathing. I wanted to feel alive instead of just existing. But surviving as a mafia boss's obsession is a whole different kind of terrifying adrenaline. Let us examine Riley, shall we? You and I have likely watched this tragedy play out before. She is a portrait of profound insecurity, hidden behind the false courage of cheap alcohol and a meaningless $200 dare. In this dimly lit room, her friend Maya grips her arm, desperately signaling for a retreat. Maya is the only one seeing the truth tonight. But Riley is suffocating beneath the heavy weight of feeling invisible, willing to do anything just to be noticed. It is a deeply tragic irony. To prove she controls her own life, she is wandering blindfolded into a predator's open jaw. The lesson here is absolute. Never allow the desperate hunger for validation to push you into a space where you cannot even find the exit. The camera glides across a penthouse constructed of cold glass and blinding crystal. It is a glittering cage engineered to make outsiders feel utterly insignificant. Riley is just 22 years old. Her existence usually fits inside the quiet corners of a local library, safely watching other people live. Tonight, she has stumbled into a level of extreme wealth that shatters her reality. Breathing in the suffocating scent of expensive cologne, she genuinely believes she is finally stepping into the light. The reality is far more grim. She has wandered straight into the private hunting ground of a ruthless man, completely blind to the trap closing around her. A simple truth worth remembering is that the brightest, most intoxicating lights often conceal the most unforgiving drop. Stick with me, because we are about to witness a devastating miscalculation. The ultra-wealthy often drag ordinary people into their orbit just to watch them drown. Maya sees this perfectly, warning that this billionaire plays by a lethal set of rules. But Riley is completely deaf to it. Her focus is entirely narrowed to the petty $200 reward. To her, that cash is a lifeline. To the men in this room, it is just the ash they flick from them cigars across the floor, tragically reducing a highly dangerous crime boss to a harmless party dare. The life lesson here is written clearly in her naive eyes. Treating a genuine predator like a playful game is the absolute fastest and most brutal way to forfeit your own soul. Let the camera pan to our subject, Dante. Even among a room full of corporate sharks, his physical presence screams absolute danger. He is over 6 feet of coiled tension, barely hidden beneath the exquisite drape of his custom suit. You can see the chilling truth in his cold expressions, entirely devoid of human warmth. It is not his massive bank account that separates him from the rest. It is the suppressed violence radiating from his posture, a thin veneer of civilization stretched over a hollow core. Yet, our naive girl honestly believes she can outsmart a man whose very survival relies on absolute dominance. The lesson here is simple but entirely vital. Never make the tragic mistake of assuming a quiet, still demeanors is the same thing as a safe harbor. Just look at the physical space around him. Every person in this glittering room subconsciously maintains a wide circle of empty air around his chair. Their bodies instinctively recognize the executioner sitting there, keeping a terrified distance. His hands bear the dark ink of tattoos, silent markers of a man who dictates his own brutal laws. And yet, Riley takes another sip of her drink, letting the false warmth of the alcohol completely silence her screaming survival instincts. Her own mind is begging her to retreat. The most tragic lesson a person can learn is that sometimes the bravest thing you can possibly do is to turn around and walk away from a fight you cannot win. Instead, she places her glass down, squares her fragile shoulders, and steps forward into her own ruin. Watch this tragic escalation unfold in slow motion. Riley hands her purse to Maya and begins to cross the marble floor, marching with the heartbreaking obedience of a lamb wandering into a slaughterhouse. As the distance between them evaporates, the terrifying reality of his world sharpens. She notices the heavy gold ring on his finger, the flash of his timepiece. But then, she makes the ultimate mistake. She meets his gaze. His pitch black eyes do not hold a single ounce of warmth. They track her approach with the cold precision of a hunter measuring his next meal. His traps snapped shut the very second she arrives. The lesson is written plainly in his stare. Never offer your fragile heart to someone who only sees it as a toy to dismantle. As she steps into his shadow, the thumping beat of the party fades into a deafening silence. Standing this close, his physical dominance is utterly suffocating. She is forced to tilt her chin back just to look at him, instinctively locking her body into a posture of submission. His jawline is carved from stone, masking the chilling void resting behind his dark pupils. Looking into the eyes of a man who feels zero remorse, you realize he has broken souls without losing a single night of sleep. And there stands our tragic girl, trembling in a cheap borrowed dress, offering herself to a completely hollow man. A bitter truth to swallow is that vulnerability is a beautiful gift, but handing it to a true monster will only leave your spirit scattered in pieces. Let us take a close look at this first collision of their two worlds. She attempts a greeting, but her throat is tight, betraying her suffocating terror. Dante does not flinch. Instead, his eyes pursue a slow, invasive sweep of her trembling frame, coldly calculating exactly how vulnerable she truly is. When he finally speaks, his voice is a low, heavy rumble soaked in a dark Italian cadence. He wonders aloud if she is remarkably brave or just incredibly foolish. When she whispers that she might be both, a ghost of a cruel smile pulls at his mouth. With one tiny flick of his wrist, his massive guards melt into the shadows. The lesson here is deeply terrifying. The most profound, dangerous isolation often happens while you are standing right in the middle of a crowded room. Notice how he effortlessly interrogates her, having already deduced she does not belong in this glittering world. Instead of hiding behind a clever lie, Riley practically bleeds unvarnished honesty. She confesses her friend sneaked her inside, whispering that she merely wanted to see how the other half lived. In a room built entirely on plastic smiles and pathological lies, her raw truth drops like a lit match. For a man who views every human conversation as a chess match to be manipulated, this pure sincerity is an addictive drug. She has just handed him the exact kind of rare innocence he wants to break. The lesson is deeply tragic. Honesty is a beautiful virtue, but bleeding your truth onto the floor in front of a starving wolf will only make him bare his teeth. The camera pushes in close as he casually evaluates her over the rim of his crystal glass. Riley leans into her vulnerability, quietly confessing her financial struggles and how terrified she feels. But then, the alcohol and adrenaline push her straight over the edge. She looks directly into the eyes of a brutal crime boss and strips away his expensive mask. She tells him he looks less like a billionaire and more like a cheap thug from the streets. It is a breathtakingly reckless insult hurled at a man who could erase her existence with a single call. The life lesson here is critical to remember. Wearing your heart on your sleeve might make you brave, but complete, unfiltered honesty in the presence of a predator is practically a signed death warrant. For a fraction of a second, the impossible happens. Dante is genuinely caught off guard. No one in his violent life ever speaks to him with such reckless disrespect. You can see the flicker of shock in his dark eyes into a sick fascination. He steps directly into her personal space, using his massive frame to physically pin her against the heavy atmosphere of the room. He murmurs that people usually shake in his presence. When she asks if she should be afraid, he drops his voice to a chilling whisper and promises that she should. Beneath her terror, he can taste her foolish, fatal intrigue. The saddest lesson to learn is how easily the human heart can confuse absolute terror with profound passion, forging chains that can never be broken. If you and I pause to look at Riley's trembling hands, we can see the catastrophe unfolding inside her chest. For the first time in her sheltered life, her veins are flooding with pure adrenaline. The quiet rudy of her existence is shattered by the thrill of danger. She softly admits that he is the exact kind of ruin she has been looking for. It is a devastating mistake. You can see the gears grinding behind Dante's cold eyes as he calculates exactly how to break her spirit. He slowly reaches out, his heavy fingers gently stroking her hair. It looks like tenderness, but it is the cold brand of a master claiming his new property. The lesson is stark. Never mistake a possessive, controlling grip for a loving embrace. It will eventually cost you everything. You and I have finally arrived at the absolute point of no return. Dante offers her one last, cruel illusion of an exit. He quietly warns her she has no idea what she is dealing with, and he is right. Riley thinks this is just a thrilling game she can abandon by morning, blind to the reality that she is handing over the keys to her own mind. Drunk on champagne and a desperate craving to feel something real, she leans closer to the heat. Dante lets his lips curve into a smirk of pure victory. As she closes the distance, she seals her dark fate, falling for the exact fire that will burn her down. It leaves us with a brutal truth about human nature. Once you willingly invite the devil inside your house, you cannot simply change the locks and expect him to leave. Let us look closely at this frame, because we are witnessing the exact second the power dynamic fractures. The light catches the subtle shift in Dante, his hand moving from a gentle brush against her skin to a sudden, unyielding grip at the base of her neck. He locks her in place. For one agonizing heartbeat, they breathe the same heavy air. Then comes the kiss. Riley wanted a quick, harmless game of rebellion. Instead, he turns that closeness into a weapon, taking complete control of the rhythm and drowning her senses. She thought she was directing a clever experiment, but he just rips up her script. It is a harsh reality we all must learn. When you intentionally invite darkness into your life, it will never just pack its bags and leave the moment you politely ask it to. The camera lingers on her wide eyes, capturing the shock flooding her nervous system. Riley is frozen against him, pressing into a man who breathes like a human but strikes with the cold calculation a loaded weapon. Until tonight, her world was filled with clumsy boys, lacking any real power. Dante is a different breed entirely. He executes this hold with the flawless precision of an architect who knows exactly which foundation to break first. The silence in the room deepens as the massive gravity of her mistake settles over her skin. Life teaches us this painful lesson time and time again. Playing casual games with a small flame is one thing, but stepping directly into a raging inferno guarantees you will walk away with permanent burns. Notice how the tension builds in the rigid slope of her shoulders. Riley frantically tries to rebuild the walls she just tore down. Her voice trembles as she stammers that her silly dare is finally over. She pushes back, desperately hunting for physical distance before her last shred of self-control snaps. But Dante simply anchors her waist. His hand operates like a steel vise. He dips his head, and his voice drops into a gravelly frequency designed specifically to shatter her defenses. He whispers that they are nowhere near finished, his touch radiating a terrifying sense of absolute ownership. It is the ultimate tragic flaw playing out right before our eyes. You cannot reach your bare hand into the cage, pet the starving wolf, and realistically expect to walk away without losing blood. Watch the devastating contrast in his movements. His thumb slowly traces her jaw, offering a manufactured illusion of tenderness from a man capable of unspeakable violence. A tear catches the dim light as Riley whispers she is confused. But deep down, she knows exactly what she did. She tried to use a profoundly dangerous man as a cheap prop to impress her friends. And now he is pulling her into his dark reality. He tilts her chin upward, forcing her to look only at him, erasing the rest of the room from her sight. We see this fatal miscalculation happen in real life so often. Using the dangerous people around you to stroke your own fragile ego will always leave you with a massive debt that you can never afford to pay back. The scene shifts into a brutal psychological interrogation disguised as a quiet conversation in the dark. Dante demands answers, while Riley desperately wraps herself in flimsy denials. She pretends the kiss meant nothing, but the camera catches her dilated pupils and the frantic pulse beating in her throat. Dante steps even closer, his tone perfectly pitched, to slice straight through her lies, quietly warning her to stop hiding from the truth. He feels the heavy electricity jumping between them. She is fighting hard to pack this terrifying moment into a neat box and walk away, but our minds always betray us in the end. The exact second you have to work tirelessly to convince your own heart that a mistake meant nothing, that mistake has already swallowed you whole. He slowly unpacks her past, his voice smooth and probing, as he asks if she always throws herself at dangerous strangers. When Riley weakly insists she has never done this before, a dark, victorious satisfaction settles into the hard lines of his face. He claims her completely in that silence, establishing an unspoken rule that she is his until he decides to let her go. Every rational instinct screaming in her blood should be telling her to run. Instead, we watch the heartbreaking collapse of her resolve as she melts into his terrifying embrace. It is a deeply uncomfortable truth that echoes through the darkest chapters of humanity. Very often, we are far more terrified of the forbidden desires waking up inside us than we are of the actual monster standing right in front of our face. You and I need to watch this specific scene closely. Dante leans in, using the heavy gravity of his presence to override her panic. In a low murmur, he asks if she plans to fight him or submit. She whispers a frantic protest, reminding him they are strangers. Yet her trembling hands tell a different story. They rise on their own, resting against his chest in a quiet, tragic surrender. Just as she yields, he cruelly steps back. The sudden chill of his absence hits her like a physical blow, leaving her desperate for contact before he extends a commanding hand for a dance. It is dark, masterful conditioning. The truth is, the most devastating battles we ever face are not against external enemies. They are fought against the treacherous, desperate cravings of our own lonely hearts. Every survival instinct inside her screams to run. Yet, fear has a tragic way of freezing the human soul. Paralyzed by his dark gravity, she slowly places her trembling hand into his grasp. He pulls her onto the dim dance floor, drawing her so close that the safe space between them vanishes. Trapped in his shadow, her mind fractures just to cope. She fixates on tiny details, the dark spice of his cologne, the faded scar above his brow. It is a beautiful, terrifying dissociation, the quiet birth of a trauma bond. Watching this psychological capture is deeply heart-wrenching, but it reveals a grim truth about the human condition. A soul starved of real connection for far too long will gladly sacrifice its own safety, just to feel the burning heat of a destructive flame. As they drift in a slow, fatal waltz, Dante probes her defenses, asking what brings her to such a ruthless gathering. In a stunning pivot, Riley drops every shield. She looks directly into his cold eyes and confesses the $200 wager, admitting she was dared to approach the most threatening man in the room. The camera catches a rare flicker in his expression, a genuine flash of surprise on the face of a man accustomed to absolute deception. She casually identifies him as a creature of violence, right to his face, stripping away his carefully built mystery. This shift in power leaves us with a profound lesson. When faced with someone who has spent their entire life manipulating the shadows, raw, unvarnished honesty is the sharpest, most devastating weapon you can wield. A deep rumble of amusement breaks from Dante's chest. They are standing so close that Riley feels the heavy vibration humming through her own collarbone. It is a terrifying level of intimacy. He watches her intently, his voice smooth, and advises her to listen to the warning bells ringing in her head. He tells her to run away while she still can, but she stubbornly stands her ground. In a breathless whisper, she confesses she knows exactly what she is doing. She is starving for something real, and he is the first spark of life she has felt in years. The tragic flaw of the human heart is laid bare right here in these shadows. People will willingly walk straight into the worst kind of fire, simply because those flames are warmer than the cold, crushing silence of an empty life. Stick with me here, because you and I need to watch this precise second together. This is the exact frame where the trap snaps shut. Dante nods, his expression turning to stone as he agrees she has lost her mind. The easy charm melts away, leaving only the brutal truth of what he really is. He tells her about the violence, the ruthlessness of his reality. Then he offers her one final chance to walk out the door, warning that if she stays, there is no going back. It is a beautiful, terrible trick. He gives her the illusion of freedom just to lock her in tight, and it reminds us of a bitter, enduring truth. The strongest cages in this world are never made of iron or steel. They are built from the quiet choices we make when we willingly hand the keys over to our own monsters. Today, you and I are going to unpack this story together. Notice how anyone else would have bolted for the door, but Riley does the exact opposite. She tips her chin up, hands trembling violently, and asks Dante what happens if she refuses to walk away. The change in him is terrifying. The casual charm evaporates, leaving behind the cold stare of a wolf smelling blood. He watches her, weighing whether she is brave or completely out of her mind. You can see the terror vibrating in her chest, yet she forces a fragile smile. It is a brilliant image of human contradiction playing out in the dark. The truth is, sometimes in our own lives, the line between a brave leap of faith and a tragic surrender is entirely invisible. The camera lingers on the heavy shadows as Dante pulls Riley flush against his chest. It is a flawless motion designed to suffocate any space between them, trapping her in his gravity. He whispers his dark terms into the quiet room. He will show his true face, but only if she ties her fate to his. Blinded by a toxic affection, she begs him to speak. The light catches his dead eyes as he says his name, Dante Cuso. A king in the criminal underworld. Without missing a beat, he casually confesses to taking the lives of 17 people, erasing them without a drop of regret. It is a heavy scene that reflects a painful reality. Often, the very arms that hold us the tightest and promise protection belong to the exact monsters we should be running from. The lens pushes in close on Dante, capturing the chilling calm of his voice. It is a low, steady sound, completely empty of the horror he is describing. He talks about broken bones and blood on the concrete with the same casual tone a stranger might use to discuss the weather. Riley stands absolutely frozen in place. Her lungs should be fighting for oxygen, and her mind should be screaming at her to flee. Instead, the thick darkness of the room wraps around her like a heavy, comforting blanket. When she asks how he knows so much about her, his eyes narrow in the dim light. He had been watching her all along, drawn to her beautiful recklessness. We must always remember that true safety is never found inside a cage, no matter how beautifully the bars are painted. Let us look closely at this moment together, you and I, as the tragedy finally sets its hook. The neon streetlights outside bleed through the blinds, painting dark shadows across his face as he reaches for her. His rough fingers gently cradle her jaw, offering a terrifying honesty. He admits that he is a walking ruin and that to spare her soul, he should send her away. He fully expects her to run, but she stays planted. He confesses his endless greed, the absolute need to possess whatever catches his eye. She whispers that they are practically strangers, but the predator only smiles, promising to consume every detail of her life. The hardest lesson anyone can learn is that the prisons holding us the tightest are usually the ones we walk into with our eyes wide open. He steps closer, erasing the final inch between them until nothing remains but the heat of their shared breath. Pressing his forehead to hers, he shrinks the entire universe down to this single, suffocating room. In the dark, he offers a terrifying bargain. He promises absolute devotion, wrapped in the guarantee of brutal violence. A tiny, rational piece of her mind screams against the madness, knowing they are standing on the edge of a jagged cliff. He simply smiles, a dangerous curve of his lips, waiting for her to jump into the abyss. Notice her desperate gaze as the crushing boredom of her normal life burns away. Sometimes, the human heart is so desperate to feel alive that it will gladly mistake the sharp edge of a knife for a lifeline. She is shivering on the absolute edge of complete ruin, but instead of stepping back into the light, she leans further into the dark. Dante feeds her exactly the kind of toxic validation her bruised soul craves, permanently silencing the warning bells in her mind. She agrees to this twisted game, yet still tries to draw fragile boundaries. Her voice shakes as she demands to finish her education, begging him never to lie about the blood on his hands. He nods, his face an unreadable mask of cold stone. Then she makes her final, heartbreaking mistake by asking for the right to leave if it becomes too much. It is a tragic illusion of control. You can negotiate all the rules you want before stepping into a cell, but the warden is always the one holding the key. The air in the small room suddenly turns dangerously still. She is asking for freedom, pleading for a promise that he will never truly lock her away. For a long, agonizing beat, Dante says absolutely nothing. A muscle jumps in his jaw, revealing a brief flash of the violent monster hiding just beneath the surface. He promises no physical harm will come to her, but his tone drops, heavy with impending doom. Walking away from a man of his status is entirely impossible. The second she is known as his, she becomes a target for every rival family. Letting her go would only mean replacing his chains with a heavier, more dangerous set. We must all face the quiet truth that when the darkness offers you a shield, it fully intends to use it as a wall to keep you trapped forever. Watch her face carefully as she finally crosses the point of no return. Her lips part, and a fragile whisper of genuine terror spills into the heavy silence between them. Dante grips her shoulders, his hands warm and grounding against her spinning mind. He tells her to hold on to that exact fear, claiming that fear is the only thing that keeps her heart beating. When she asks if he will shield her from the monsters in his syndicate, he swears his actual life to her, promising that no one will touch her without stepping over his dead body. Meanwhile, the muffled bass of the college party thumps through the walls, completely blind to the tragedy. Life teaches us early on that our entire universe can shatter, while the rest of the world simply keeps on dancing in the background. Her phone begins to buzz wildly inside her small purse. It is the literal sound of her normal, safe life desperately trying to pull her back to the light. She completely ignores it. Slowly lifting her chin, she meets the dark, burning eyes of the man destined to ruin her, and she fully surrenders. Her voice is barely a breath as she promises to stay. A slow, triumphant smile breaks across his face. When he finally pulls her in, it is not a kiss of gentle affection, but a heavy, consuming claim. One rough hand holds the back of her head, sealing her fate in the shadows. It highlights a painful flaw in our human nature. We will gladly hand over the keys to our own freedom if someone simply makes us believe we are the absolute center of their entire universe. When they finally break apart, Riley gasps desperately for air. Her chest heaves, and every nerve ending in her body is singing with a dangerous, electric heat. Dante refuses to let her recover her senses. His fingers lace tightly through hers in a heavy, dominant grip that leaves absolutely zero room for hesitation. He pulls her out of the shadows, leading her away from the flashing neon of the club and down into the cold, silent concrete of his reality. A massive enforcer steps out of the gloom, bowing his head in quiet respect to his boss. The sudden chill in the air snaps Riley out of her fog, reminding her of the innocent friend she abandoned on the dance floor. The painful reality is that we rarely realize we are falling until we hit the solid ground. Let us pause here and look at the terrible conflict written across her face. She stumbles over her words, begging for a single moment to text her friend. Dante does not get angry at the request. Instead, a dark, amused light dances in his eyes. He tells her she is perfectly free to text, wrapping her invisible chains in the sweet, comforting illusion of choice. Her hands shake violently as she looks at the bright screen, seeing 7 frantic messages from her friend threatening to call the police. What do you say when you have just traded your soul away? It is a lonely, terrifying crossroad. The hardest part of choosing a dark path is knowing you cannot explain it. Sometimes, to walk through a new door, you have to let the people behind it believe you are lost. Dante calmly watches the panic rise in her chest and gently takes the reins. His voice is as smooth as glass as he dictates exactly what she should type, feeding her the perfect lie of safety. She types the words, adding her own note that she is choosing this path, a desperate attempt to feel like she is still in control of her life. The reply from her friend comes instantly, asking if she has completely lost her mind. Riley stares at the glowing screen for a long, heavy second before replying that she knows exactly what she is doing. Her friend relents, demanding a location and a morning phone call. There is a deep comfort here. A true friend will never turn their back on you when you walk into the fire. They will simply ask you to leave a trail of breadcrumbs. The phone slips from her trembling fingers into her purse. She lifts her gaze to the kingpin, her chest rising and falling as she whispers a total surrender. The air fractures under the weight of her words. Dante stares back, a dangerous heat flashing across his features, warning her to tread carefully, but she is completely intoxicated by the free fall. Looking the monster dead in the eye, she asks for the absolute worst of it. Heavy oak doors slam shut behind them, cutting off the pounding music and locking them in a dim room, steeped in leather and raw power. Today you and I are going to unpack this story together, because there is a heavy cost to our desires. Once you willingly invite a storm inside, you can never complain when the wind tears the roof off your shelter. Floor-to-ceiling windows reveal a glittering skyline, but the men inside ignore it completely. 4 dark figures stand near a massive desk, radiating the same quiet, lethal violence as the man beside her. The second she steps inside, the room flatlines into dead silence. 4 sets of cold eyes lock onto her frame. Dante does not offer a greeting. He simply presses his large hand firmly against the small of her back in a quiet display of absolute ownership. He tells the men she is under his protection, and the words hit the floor like stones. It is not an introduction, but a fatal warning. We all share a deep need to be chosen and fiercely loved by someone. But the hard truth is that being chosen by a shadow only guarantees you will forever be hunted in the dark. The camera lingers on a jagged scar across Marco's cheek, catching the dim light as he dares to break the silence. A man built entirely on rigid loyalty. He quietly asks if they might discuss this sudden variable. Dante does not raise his voice. Instead, the temperature in the room simply plummets. His tone is a freezing absolute. He murmurs that he is delivering a fact, not requesting permission. Instantly, the invisible chains of the syndicate snap right back into their rigid locks. Marco swallows his pride, his jaw tight as he offers Riley a hollow welcome. The others nod, silently weighing this fragile girl against the ruin she brings. True command is always a solitary burden. You never take a democratic vote on matters of the heart, even if that single choice will ultimately burn your entire empire straight to the ground. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? The framing here is a masterclass in shifting tension. Dante points out Luca, the money man, and Anthony, the data broker. Suddenly, Riley's survival instinct completely misfires. She blurts out, asking if that makes him the hacker. The suffocating dread in the room shatters. Anthony lets out a slow smirk, finding her blunt nature charming. Beside her, Dante radiates a dark, possessive pride. He openly boasts she was brave enough to kiss him on a dare. Vincent twitches in pure shock, unable to process his boss being used for a childish game. Desperate, Riley weakly clarifies it was for $200. It is a striking reminder of reality. Pure honesty holds a terrifying power, and sheer innocence is often the only weapon capable of disarming seasoned monsters. The lens shifts, focusing tightly on Riley as she attempts to claw back a fraction of control. She forces a nervous laugh, asking if the bet still counts if she actually enjoyed the contact. Dante does not even blink, exhibiting the calm certainty of a true megalomaniac. He pulls her down onto the heavy leather sofa. He casually offers her $2,000 just for walking into his life, declaring her days of cheap meals entirely over. You can see her jaw tremble as she tries to protest, but behind her wide eyes, the desperate calculation is already running. The tragic life lesson here is that prolonged starvation fundamentally rewires the human mind. When a person is totally drained by poverty, dignity becomes a luxury they cannot afford. Morality will always pause to weigh the exchange rate of a predator's golden offer. Dante leans in, his large hand tracing the thin fabric of her borrowed dress right along her fragile ribs. It is a calculated display of dominance, dragging her deepest financial insecurities into the harsh light. Logically, Riley should pull away in disgust. Instead, the camera catches the exact second the trap closes around her heart. Rather than feeling humiliated by his public dissection, she finally feels visible. Someone is analyzing her silent agony, right down to the blisters bleeding into her shoes. It reveals a terrifying truth of human nature. We crave to be understood so desperately that we will gladly accept comfort from a monster. She stands completely frozen, fatally mistaking his cold, predatory observation for genuine, loving care. The lighting turns ice cold. This is the precise frame where her previous identity is permanently erased. With terrifying detachment, Dante taps his phone, purchasing her a completely new reality. He dictates that a new wardrobe is non-negotiable, cementing the fact that she is now his property. You can see the violent friction written across her pale face. Her desire for independence is colliding with a primal need to survive. She wants to push this billionaire away, but the crushing weight of her debt holds her down. The harsh life lesson is that profound exhaustion makes willing captives of us all. When you are drowning, principles simply dissolve into thin air. She does not fight back. She quietly barters away her fundamental autonomy, all to buy a single fleeting moment of financial peace. Watch how Riley desperately clings to the sinking wreckage of her former independence. Her voice shakes as she begs to keep attending her classes, terrified of fading into just another beautiful object on his shelf. Dante plays this scene with the smooth grace of a master manipulator. He does not crush her spirit. Instead, he validates her ambition. He praises her education, while softly reminding her that he owns half the concrete infrastructure of the city. The essential life lesson here is that the most dangerous cages are always the ones softly lined with velvet. But before she can settle into his golden trap, Marco steps forward. His harsh voice shatters the illusion, coldly detailing strict lockdown protocols. The romance bleeds out of the frame, leaving only the brutal, metallic reality of organized crime. Stick with me, because we are about to uncover the real tragedy here. Marco's words hit like a physical blow. By simply breathing the same air as Dante, Riley is now a confirmed target. Dante leans back, casually confessing that a rival crime family was watching their public display. You can see the romance instantly drain from her face, replaced by the pale grip of primal survival. Dante maintains unapologetic eye contact. His enemies, he murmurs, will now weaponize her to tear him down. The steel jaws of the trap have already snapped shut. She thought she had found a dark protector, but she has just been drafted onto the front lines of a bloody war. A vital life lesson is that ignoring a red flag does not make it disappear. It only guarantees the fatal collision when you finally hit the wall. The camera pulls in tight on Riley's trembling lips. She whispers that this situation is completely irrational. A single, reckless kiss has spiraled into a demand for round-the-clock armed surveillance. Dante stares back, an apex predator devoid of a single ounce of remorse. He demands absolute possession of her life in exchange for his violent protection. He gestures to the door, offering her a phantom choice to simply walk away. But the psychological tether has already sunk deep into her skin. A dark truth of human nature is that a person will almost always choose a familiar danger over the terrifying anxiety of the unknown. We know she will not walk out into the freezing rain to face her debts alone. She stands still, actively participating in her own captivity, handing over the key to her cage. You and I are going to look at this together. Watch the micro expressions on her face. This is the exact frame where the roots of a dark bond dig into her soul. Riley stares at her captor, feeling the heat of his aggressive possession. Slowly, her baseline survival instincts power down. Instead of running for the door, she does the unthinkable. She begins negotiating the terms of her own heavy surveillance. She quietly asks if men with guns will be sitting in her lectures. Dante clinically maps out the invasion: digital wiretaps, hacked campus cameras, and killers waiting in the library. She bows her head, accepting this horrific loss of autonomy. The chilling life lesson here is clear. When you compromise your deepest boundaries just once, you leave the front door wide open for a lifetime of trespasses. Vincent steps into the light, lying smoothly, that this heavy security will not change her daily life. Riley scans the room, asking softly how often Dante assigns armed guards to his women. The camera cuts to Marco, who drops the crushing reality. Never. She is the first civilian allowed into his world in 15 years. The revelation hits hard, forging an instant trauma bond. She becomes the single exception to a violent man's isolation, painting a massive target on her back disguised as romance. Let us pause and think about this together. Being the sole exception to a damaged person is almost never a prize. It is a very dangerous burden. You might win their affection, but you are also forced to carry the crushing weight of their deepest, darkest demons. Let us watch closely, because what happens next is a brilliant display of emotional control. Riley looks up through the dim lighting, asking the heartbreaking question every victim eventually asks. Why me? Dante closes the distance, his massive hand gently catching her jaw. His voice is a low rumble when he admits he does not actually know. He praises her reckless bravery, pointing out that she saw the monster in the dark and chose to play anyway. He whispers a vow that he will never let her walk away. By any normal standard, this suffocating possessiveness should make her run for the door, but the tragedy deepens because it makes her feel valued. She leans into his palm. The lesson is simple. A starving heart craving validation will almost always silence our basic instinct to survive. The camera perfectly captures the heavy gravity of the room. Dante frames his suffocating control not as a choice, but as an inevitable force of nature. He murmurs that her fate was sealed the exact second she approached his table. When she tries to call out his arrogance, he silences her, pulling her into a deep kiss right in front of his soldiers. It is a primal display of territorial marking for his enforcers. Riley breathes heavily under the cold stares of 4 lethal killers. Dante pulls back, casually waving his crew away as if they are entirely disposable. The life lesson here is deeply sobering. When someone manages to completely isolate you in a crowded room, they are not actually protecting you from the world. They are actively capturing you for themselves. We now cross the line into total psychological violation. Dante issues a chilling order. He wants her entire financial footprint wiped from the earth by tomorrow afternoon. Riley panics, stammering about her massive loans. But Anthony, the hacker, he cheerfully reads out her exact debt down to the final penny, $73,412. He adds that her landlord has been stealing from her. In mere minutes, her existence is dissected and laid bare. It is a brutal destruction of her privacy. The life lesson here is quite stark. True financial independence is the ultimate shield against human manipulation. The very moment you let someone else buy your personal debts, you hand them the permanent deed to your own soul. The camera pushes in as Anthony clinically takes apart Riley's entire existence in exactly 15 minutes. He pauses just to praise her credit score. A sickening beat of cold humor echoing in the dark room. Riley finally breaks, her voice shaking as she accuses Dante of trying to buy her soul. Dante defends himself flawlessly. Shadows contour his sharp face as he leans in, murmuring that he merely takes care of what already belongs to him. He uses his vast wealth as a weapon, swearing he cannot stand to watch her suffer. There is a deeply tragic truth we must learn here. Absolute control often wears the beautiful mask of extreme generosity. She whispers that they are practically strangers, but her broken tone betrays total submission. The psychological war is officially over. Dante clears the room with a single hushed command. The heavy doors click shut, creating a suffocating vacuum of silence. Marco casts a parting glance, a silent warning of bloodshed that she does not quite understand. The lighting softens, framing Dante as he switches modes, becoming the hyper-attentive lover. He tilts his head, asking softly what haunts her thoughts. We are watching a devastating identity crisis unfold in real time. Just hours ago, Joie was a normal student breathing ordinary air. Now, she scrambles to categorize her tie to a violent predator. The word girlfriend feels hollow, while property is too horrifying to say aloud. The tragic lesson here is simple. If you cannot safely define your position in a relationship, you are the one being consumed by it. Let us look at this frame by frame. Dante slowly breaks down her panic, stripping away all social labels until one terrifying fact remains. She belongs to him. When her trembling lips question her freedom to leave, the camera catches a tiny twitch in his jaw. He would burn the entire city down before letting her walk away. He uses their intense physical chemistry as a weapon, daring her to deny the heat between them. It is pure tragedy. Sitting beside this lethal man feels far more vibrant than her entire previous life. A crucial life lesson unfolds right here. High adrenaline environments easily trick the human brain into feeling a false sense of intimacy. With a broken sob, she confesses her deep fear, willingly handing her final psychological weapons over to her captor. The camera frames her chest, violently rising and falling. Riley is hyperventilating, completely crushed by this hostile takeover. Notice the brilliant cruelty in Dante's method. He uses physical comfort, lacing his warm fingers with her shaking hands to offer a fake illusion of safety. Behind them, the guards remain standing. Then he drops his ultimate leverage, offering to wipe out her $73,000 debt entirely. He suggests a loan to soothe her fragile pride, knowing this financial chain binds her to him forever. The lens captures the tragic collapse of her moral framework. Life brutally teaches us that everyone has a breaking point when basic survival is weighed against high principles. She entered a free guest. She leaves as acquired collateral. Watch this scene closely to find the exact second her independence is permanently lost. Riley attempts a useless defense, applying gentle, everyday logic to a ruthless predator by begging for time to think. Dante's reaction is dark cinema at its absolute best. He lowers his head, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles as the steel jaws of his trap snap shut. He demands the total consumption of her life. Desperate, she asks the fatal question. Why break his rigid rules just for her? The room darkens as he confesses his wife died 7 years ago. Here is a critical life lesson regarding the darkest sides of human nature. When a truly dangerous man exposes his deepest scars, he is not asking for your pity. He is calmly stating that you are now chained to his unhealed trauma. The camera pulls back to reveal the bleak, empty space of a fractured mind. Watching a spouse slowly fade away changes a man's soul forever. For 18 brutal months, Dante sat in harsh lighting, watching his wife succumb to illness. He built a massive, impenetrable wall around his heart. For 7 long years, potential lovers were nothing more than passing shadows. That is, until Riley blindly stumbled into his world, initiating contact under the reckless cover of a stupid party dare. Now, she desperately tries to explain away that fatal kiss as a meaningless joke. Yet, as we see in all great tragedies, there is a profound life lesson waiting for us. The most catastrophic shifts in human destiny are almost always triggered by the most trivial, impulsive actions we take. The dramatic irony in this single frame is absolutely staggering. Here sits a massive apex predator, a man whose entire life revolves around orchestrating terror, presenting a flawless illusion of deep vulnerability. His voice drops to a cinematic whisper, confessing that her sudden arrival has violently woken up his dead heart. Riley's breath catches. She immediately compares her beautifully mundane life to the perfect, idealized ghost of his late wife. But Dante closes the distance. His large hands tenderly cup her face as he systematically takes apart her deepest insecurities. There is a vital lesson here. We often obsess over our own perceived flaws, but a highly skilled manipulator will take those exact vulnerabilities and use them to paint you as their ultimate masterpiece. Riley instinctively pulls back, voicing the deeply human fear of never being quite enough. Dante refuses to entertain any sort of verbal negotiation. The lens focuses tightly on his hands as he applies a tender, highly calculated physical touch. He silences her doubts with a gentleness that is far more destabilizing than a physical strike. By establishing instant dominance and whispering promises to carry her burdens, he rapidly speeds up her cycle of dependency. He drops a chilling fact. He proposed to his late wife after a mere 72 hours. He expects nothing less than Riley's absolute surrender. In the tragic theater of human behavior, we learn a harsh truth. Abandoning our critical thinking for the sweet illusion of a destined connection is often our most fatal error. Let us look at this moment together, you and I. Dante speaks with a chilling certainty that ought to send Riley running, but rather than fleeing, we watch the quiet, tragic dawn of a trauma bond. She twists his suffocating control into validation, admitting her fear while her posture melts right into his snare. The camera lingers on Dante as he drops the truth that he would have hunted her down for months if necessary. Riley just offers a shaky laugh, missing the real peril staring her in the face. Their quiet bubble breaks as the music from the gala bleeds back in. We all learn this simple lesson eventually. Hiding in the shadows might give you a moment to breathe, but sooner or later, you have to step back into the noise and face the dance monsters waiting for you. Watch how the room's pressure slowly crushes her. Dante slips into the role of the all-knowing protector, whispering that this dangerous society now sees her as his exclusive property. The lens draws our eyes right to the frantic pulse beating at Riley's throat. She looks around the glowing room, suddenly aware of the violence hiding under the crystal chandeliers. Dante replies with a cold, terrifying calmness, treating her like an object of immense value he refuses to leave unguarded. He pulls her tight against his side, turning his arm into a heavy anchor that forces her to rely entirely on him. Here is the hard truth about trading freedom for security. When you ask a predator to keep you safe from the shadows, you automatically inherit every single enemy that predator has ever made. You can actually see the mental distortion happening right behind Riley's eyes. Every instinct should scream against his possessive words, but her brain twists his dominance into a fake kind of safety. As they cross into the glittering ballroom, the crowd locks onto her. She becomes a fragile bird trapped under a heavy social microscope. Dante uses a brilliant, terrifying trick of body language. He presses a heavy hand flat against her spine, a silent broadcast to the room that she belongs to him. Right at her weakest second, Natalia slides into view, wearing a fortune in silver silk. It brings us to a quiet realization about human nature. The absolute worst damage we do to one another never requires a weapon. The deepest cuts always come wrapped in polite conversation and perfectly charming smiles. Dante tries to shut Natalia out with a freezing silence, hoping to erase her out of the scene. But she deflects effortlessly, turning her sharp eyes toward the weaker target. With elegant cruelty, she practically calls Riley a stray dog he picked up off the street. It is textbook abuse meant to shatter whatever confidence the girl has left. The frame snaps back to Dante. He delivers a counter threat so low that you can feel the genuine violence humming right beneath his words. Natalia just beams back at him with an empty, perfectly practiced smile before fading away into the crowd. We can all take a simple survival lesson from this exchange. A person who can completely humiliate you without ever raising their voice or dropping their warm smile is the exact kind of person you should fear the most. The camera pushes tight on Dante's hand as his fingers dig harder into Riley's waist. He leans down, dropping a heavy piece of history on her shoulders. He explains that Natalia had been circling like a vulture long before his first wife passed away, backed by a dangerous crime family. You can see Riley physically glitch as the panic sets in. In just a few hours, she has made a very real enemy. Before she can even catch her breath, another shadow blocks the light. This is Nico, a rival leader wearing a mask of friendly charm. Dante's entire body goes stiff, bracing for a fight. It shows us a simple truth about the things we hold dear. The second you show the world how much you care about someone, you instantly hand your enemies the exact weapon they need to destroy you. Let us look at this scene together, you and I. Notice the way the light shifts us right as Nico forces his face into a mask of chilling calm. The lens pushes close on his eyes. They are dead and calculating, looking at Riley like she is nothing more than a weak point to exploit. He weaponizes her young age, taking a clean slice at Dante's ego while maintaining a warm, polite smile. His casual goodbye is barely hiding a promise of violence. When Nico finally steps out of the shot, the sheer weight of the room crashes down on Riley. She forgets how to breathe, realizing she is no longer just a person, but a pawn on a bloody board. It is a harsh reality we all face eventually. Caring deeply for someone is a beautiful thing, but it is also the fastest way to give the worst people in the world the power to break you. The camera slowly circles the two of them, catching the exact second Dante breaks her independence. He leans in tight, his voice dropping to a hard rumble beneath the party noise, telling her that his control is the only thing keeping her alive. Crushed by the pure exhaustion of fear, Riley simply nods. From there, the night turns into a dizzying blur. It is a dance of beautiful monsters wearing fine silk and sharp suits. Riley forces herself through the motions, pasting a fake smile on her face, but her wide eyes show the panic of a trapped animal. She knows every charming man kissing her hand is already figuring out her price tag. It is a vital rule for moving through the world. The most dangerous people are never the ones shouting at you. They are the ones smiling warmly while they quietly figure out how to use you. You can feel the oxygen leaving the room as the pressure builds around Riley. Dante instantly notices she is about to crack. The camera watches his hand slide down to the base of her spine, rubbing slow circles to force her racing pulse to slow down. He leans in and murmurs into her hair, admitting that bringing her here tonight was a deliberate act of war after 7 years of hiding. He promises her they are almost done, but when you are drowning in panic. 1 minute feels like a lifetime. Her bones literally ache from the stress. We see this pattern in our own lives too. The actual moment of pain is rarely the thing that ruins us. What truly breaks a person is the endless, agonizing wait in the dark, wondering exactly when the heavy blow is finally going to land. Dante shifts his attention to one final competitor. They speak in polite, quiet voices, sounding like businessmen rather than criminals carving up a city. Across the floor, Riley locks eyes with her old friend Maya. The camera shifts, focus back and forth, showing Maya staring with a mix of genuine horror and sick fascination. Riley manages a weak, trembling wave. It hits her right then. She has crossed a line in the sand, and her normal life is entirely gone. Dante grips her and recoils into the cold steel of a private elevator. The metal doors slide closed, instantly killing the music and leaving them in a thick, heavy quiet. It reminds us of a simple reality. We expect our biggest life changes to happen with a massive crash, but the moments that truly alter our fate usually happen in absolute, deafening silence. Pay attention to this next shot because this is the exact second the cage locks. They walk into the cold concrete of the parking garage, and Riley finally lets out a shaking gasp of air. Dante just watches her. There is a cold, amused smile on his face as she shivers, chanced against the side of his black car. Her voice cracks as she asks if she is always going to feel this terrified, like a rabbit waiting for the wolves. He pushes her into the passenger seat, his voice completely dead. He tells her the fear only stops when everyone understands she is his property. It points to a really sad truth about human nature. We spend so much time begging for someone to build high walls and keep the bad things away, entirely forgetting that the fortress we ask for will eventually become the prison we cannot escape. The view shrinks down to the tight, suffocating space inside the car. The smell of expensive leather acts like a soft blindfold over her racing panic. Dante grips the steering wheel, his face flashing in the harsh glow of the street lights. He looks like a king driving away with his prize. He softly tells her they are going to his private house, and she nods much too fast. She has completely given up. You and I have probably both made this mistake. You did. When we feel completely cornered, we just smile and follow the rules, hoping our good behavior will save us. He flashes a terribly handsome smile in the dark, quietly telling her to close her eyes and rest. But here is the lesson we cannot ignore. A predator will always use a soft, comforting voice right before they lock the door. She is never going to feel safe enough to rest again. Lit only by the faint glow of the dashboard, Dante sells her a massive lie. He promises to keep her safe, bragging about his intense self-control and how he holds his dark urges back. The truly tragic part is the sick little thrills stomach. Some broken part of her mind actually wants him to cross that line. She whispers into the empty car, saying she feels like she is stuck in a bad dream. Dante hits her with a calculated line, claiming that her entering his life has totally ruined his cold, organized world. She pulls away, telling him she is just an ordinary girl who does not belong there. But she is missing a massive lesson about how life works. True darkness never goes looking for more shadows. It will always hunt down the brightest, most innocent light it can find, simply for the pleasure of swallowing it whole. He silences her doubts with a single, heavy look, silently demanding she accept that she is breathtaking and the rest of the world is simply blind. For Riley, that kind of validation hits the bloodstream like a narcotic, leaving her speechless as the street lights blur and fade. Soon, the camera tracks their slow descent into the concrete belly of his fortified garage. They step into a private elevator, rising to a penthouse designed to conquer the human soul. Floor-to-ceiling glass reveals the glittering city below, laid out like a dark carpet of shattered diamonds. It is beautiful, but it is a finely tuned psychological weapon. The terrifying reality of reaching the top is that the altitude only hides your isolation. A simple lesson we often forget is this: up here, a fall does not hurt, it just kills you. The camera pans slowly across the room, every shadow dripping with quiet power. We see dark leather, poured wine, and priceless art stolen from desperate men. Dante casts his expensive jacket aside, like old rags, and moves straight to the bar. Desperate for an anchor in this surreal nightmare, Riley asks for water, drifting toward the towering glass panes. As he hands over the crystal, his fingers brush hers, a slow, deliberate burn against her skin. The crushing absence of other human life settles heavily over her shoulders. No guards, no friends, nobody to hear a scream. She breathes out, foolishly thinking the locked doors keeps the monsters out on the street. The fatal mistake we often make is confusing isolation for true safety, forgetting entirely who actually holds the key. Today, you and I are going to unpack this story together. We can see the frantic gears turning in her mind, desperate to apply normal logic to absolute madness. She tries to shrink the horror into a simple, logistical problem, asking how an armed guard is supposed to sit quietly in her morning college lectures. Dante places his drink on the dark wood and begins a slow, mesmerizing walk toward her. He tells her the guard will be a ghost, a shadow woven into her life. She stands frozen, her wide eyes tracking his approach with the tragic stillness of a wounded deer. Then she makes the ultimate mistake of asking when she can go home. Dante steps into her space and softly tells her she already is. The tragedy of power is how easily it disguises itself as love. The air goes completely still. This was never a discussion, it was a quiet execution of her freedom. He casually decrees that her tiny apartment is a thing of the past. A spark of rebellion flares in her chest. She stammers out her defenses, her signed lease, her roommates, the rules of her simple life. Dante does not raise his voice. He simply recites her pain back to her, detailing the flaws in her lease and the cold indifference of the girls she lives with. The devastating truth of the human heart is that deep loneliness is often an open invitation to the devil. As the camera lingers on a single tear sliding down her cheek, we realize she is not mourning her lost freedom. She is crying because a violent stranger paid closer attention to her than anyone she called a friend. There is no trace of pity in his dark eyes. We see only the chilling certainty of a man who firmly believes he is a god. He locks his gaze onto hers, using the bitter details of her exhaustion and her lonely walls to justify his total invasion. She tries to push back, her voice shaking as she accuses him of trespassing into her soul. But Dante merely closes the final inch between them, sealing the darkest bargain she will ever make. He will give her the world, his money, and his blood-soaked empire, and in return, he will swallow her whole. The cruel lesson of survival is that monsters do not need to wear masks if they catch you starving in the cold. Her heart is hammering against her ribs, but the ultimate tragedy is this: she is no longer terrified. She is completely mesmerized. The camera pushes in close, capturing the exact cinematic frame where Riley's spirit finally shatters. Dim lighting casts heavy shadows across her face as she asks how she can survive this collapse of her world. Dante's hand enters the shot, his large fingers curling roughly beneath her jaw. It mimics tender affection, yet the tight grip screams of absolute ownership. He murmurs that he would burn the entire city to ash just to keep her safe. She finally breathes out the words of her own doom, whispering that she is his. The kiss that follows is not romantic, it is an eclipse, a dark, consuming possession. The painful truth we learn is that people will often trade their ultimate freedom, peace, just to feel the dangerous comfort of belonging to someone else. In the quiet language of visual storytelling, the point of no return is rarely a violent struggle. It is this exact shot, a silent, desperate surrender. Riley completely melts against his chest, her trembling fingers gripping the dark fabric of his shirt. You can almost smell the expensive bourbon mixed with the cold iron of his authority. For a single frame, Dante's rigid mask slips. His breath hitches. He whispers a rough warning that they need to stop, yet his body refuses to step back, not even an inch. The tragic life lesson bleeding through the screen is that deep psychological trauma can make pure self-destruction look remarkably like a sweeping romance. She is staring right into the eyes of a man who ruins lives, silently begging him to completely ruin hers. The background score fades to a low, ominous hum as Dante delivers his final ultimatum. The lighting catches the cold glint in his eyes as he warns her this is not just a fleeting night. If she follows him through that bedroom door, she is tying her soul to a violent underworld. Any rational person would hear the music swell and run for their life. But Riley is simply exhausted by a lifetime of merely surviving. She tilts her head, her posture soft and yielding, whispering that she wants to be reckless. The camera lingers on Dante's face, capturing the dark hunger of a predator watching the steel jaws of his trap snap shut. The terrifying life lesson we learn is that the most inescapable cages are the ones we walk right into with a willing smile. He will never let her leave. Stick with me, this is where it gets interesting. Watch closely how the director frames this loss of power. The moment Riley breathes out her need to stay, Dante crosses the final threshold of ownership. The camera sweeps backward as he lifts her into his arms, carrying her deep into his shadow-drenched bedroom. Look at the sheer tension in his hands. It is not an embrace. It is the branding of a conqueror claiming the spoils of war. She sits perfectly still, a deer caught in the headlights, as he slowly begins to unbutton his collar. The harsh lighting shatters her romantic fairy tale, revealing the grim reality of her capture. The haunting lesson woven into this scene is that what feels like a grand romance is often just the opening act of a beautifully orchestrated captivity. The pacing shifts dramatically when she raises a trembling hand and tells him to wait. For just a heartbeat, this apex predator freezes, giving her a beautiful, tragic illusion of control. The camera focuses on her shaking fingers as she begins to undress him, pushing the heavy fabric down his broad shoulders. What is revealed is a terrifying canvas of sheer violence. The lighting highlights thick ink crawling across his skin skulls and sacred icons bleeding into sharp lines. It is a visual map of a ruthless life. By touching these scars, she is actively embracing the suffocating darkness of his world. The deeply human lesson in this frame is how easily we mistake a dangerous temporary stillness for genuine safety, willingly tying our fate to his tragic, broken history. Notice the careful choreography of his manipulation. Dante uses his own scarred flesh as an emotional anchor, pulling her much deeper under the surface. When Riley traces the harsh lines of his tattoos, he speaks in a low whisper, painting his violent past as a heavy burden of survival rather than a conscious choice. He softly kisses the center of her palm, a brilliant directorial move that distracts her from his lethal nature. The dress slipping from her shoulders and pooling on the cold floor is not a moment of passion. It is the visual collapse of her remaining boundaries. The tragic lesson buried in this romantic imagery is painfully clear what a broken heart perceives as the absolute safest harbor is often just the deceptive, quiet eye of a highly destructive storm. You and I have to pause here and truly appreciate the tragic irony of this sequence. Under the heavy, suffocating gaze of a known killer, Riley experiences a deeply flawed surge of empowerment. The audio track isolates his dark whispers, telling her she is perfect, wrapping her mind entirely in his toxic web. The scene cuts abruptly to a blindingly bright morning. The sudden sunlight is jarring. Riley wakes up physically pinned beneath his heavy arm. In that split second, the romantic fog burns away, and raw terror flashes across her face. She is terrified to wake the beast sleeping beside her. The harsh truth of life is that a fleeting sense of power often masks the tragic, permanent surrender of our fundamental freedom. She is entirely trapped. Khung hình mở ra từ trên cao, ánh ban mai dịu nhẹ tương phản, gay gắt với sự thật tàn khốc mà Riley vừa bước vào. Gương mặt Dante khi ngủ được thả lỏng khiến gã đàn ông nhuốm máu này trông vô hại đến đáng sợ. Ngược lại, Riley nằm cứng đờ, từng cơn nhức mỏi trên cơ thể là minh chứng cho một thế giới ngầm không lối thoát. Ta gần như nghe được tiếng tâm trí. Cô tuyệt vọng tìm cách biện minh cho sự điên rồ này. Nhưng kẻ đi săn như Dante không bao giờ mất cảnh giác. Hắn vẫn nhắm mắt, môi khẽ nhếch lên, nụ cười u tối. Hắn lầm bầm rằng nhịp tim cô quá nhanh và suy nghĩ của cô đang quá ồn ào. Cô lập tức buông lời xin lỗi trong vô thức. Bài học ở đây, thật xót xa sự thao túng tâm lý có thể bóp méo thực tại của ta nhanh đến mức nào. Tới khi những điều dị thường nhất lại trở thành thứ mà ta ôm lấy bằng mọi giá. Đạo diễn từ từ kéo sự căng thẳng bao trùm lại căn phòng. Dante thản nhiên coi sự nhạy bén cực độ của mình là cái giá để sinh tồn trong một đế chế bạo lực. Hắn mở mắt ánh nhìn lạnh lẽo, trống rỗng, rồi buông lời chào bằng chất giọng khan đặc. Người phụ nữ kiêu hãnh đêm qua đã bốc hơi, chỉ còn lại một cô gái runway kéo chăn lên trong sự quy phục. Bàn tay hắn lười biếng vẽ những vòng tròn nặng nề bên hông cô. Đó không phải là cái vuốt ve của người tình, mà là móng vuốt của kẻ đi săn đang dò xét chút hối hận mong manh nhất nơi con mồi. Cảm nhận được sát khí từ sự tĩnh lặng của hắn, Riley van nài để hắn tin cô không hề hối tiếc. Bài học tàn khốc là khao khát xoa dịu một con quái vật thường ép ta tự tay bóp nghẹt bản năng sinh tồn và tự tôn của chính mình. Máy quay chậm chậm xoay vòng, tóm gọn cơn hoảng loạn của Riley khi cô nhận ra sự phi lý của thực tại. Giọng cô run rẩy thầm thì rằng mới 12 giờ trước họ còn là người rừng. Vậy mà giờ cô đã nằm giữa vòng vây vũ trang của hắn. Cô gọi tình cảnh này là sự điên rồ. Thế nhưng Dante không hề chớp mắt sự điềm tĩnh nơi hắn tỏa ra áp lực kinh hoàng. Hắn áp tay vào mặt cô, dùng sự đụng chạm nặng nề để thao túng, gieo rắc niềm tin rằng đây chính là định mệnh. Ngay khi cô sắp chìm vào huyễn cảnh, tiếng rung chói tai của chiếc điện thoại đã xé toạc ảo ảnh ngột ngạt đó. Một chi tiết điện ảnh xuất sắc mang theo bài học cốt lõi. Dù bạn có cố trốn sâu đến đâu trong một lớp vỏ bọc và dối trá, thế giới thực vẫn luôn biết cách phá cửa để lôi bạn về với ánh sáng. Sự căng thẳng ngột ngạt trong căn phòng bị bẻ gãy tức khắc. Riley đờ đẫn nhìn màn hình, nhận ra cô bạn thân Maya đang điên cuồng tìm cách xác nhận xem cô còn sống hay không. Dante đặt nụ hôn chậm rãi lên trán cô trước khi rời giường. Ống kính tinh theo sát chuyển động của hắn, mượt mà và tĩnh lặng như một con báo đen trượt vào bóng tối để pha cà phê, bị bỏ lại giữa căn phòng rộng lớn. Riley luống cuống bò trên mặt sàn lạnh buốt để nhặt nhạnh quần áo. Điện thoại của cô nhấp nháy với 13 cuộc gọi nhỡ và tin nhắn hoang loạn. Một phân cảnh tĩnh lặng nhưng đánh mạnh vào tâm lý người xem, thắp lên một bài học vô giá. Tình bạn đích thực không nằm ở những lời đường mật, mà là việc có một người sẵn sàng xới tung mọi thứ, liều mạng lôi bạn ra khi bóng tối trực chờ nuốt chửng lấy bạn. Âm thanh cắt gắt giữa tiếng thì thầm hoang loạn của Riley và giọng thất thanh của Maya. Maya gần như gào thét dọa gọi cảnh sát đến lôi bạn mình khỏi hang cọp. Khi bị gặng hỏi liệu có thực sự lên giường với gã mafia đó không, đạo diễn liền dùng cú máy cận cảnh. Vệt đỏ của sự tội lỗi lan dần trên cổ Riley. Sự im lặng của cô chát chúa hơn vạn lời nói. Maya sững sờ. Nhắc khán giả nhớ lại Riley từng là cô gái luôn ưu tiên sự an toàn và tính toán kỹ lưỡng mọi bước đi. Cú trượt dài tâm lý này để lại một bài học đầy khiêm nhường. Con người có thể dành trọn cả cuộc đời để xây dựng một hàng rào phòng thủ hoàn hảo, nhưng đôi khi chỉ một cú va chạm với một thảm họa mang vẻ ngoài quyến rũ, ngọn lửa cám dỗ sẽ lập tức thiêu rụi mọi nguyên tắc an toàn chỉ trong chớp mắt. Enter. Khung hình thu hẹp vào khuôn mặt căng thẳng của Riley khi cô tuyệt vọng bóp méo thực tại. Cố tô vẽ đêm qua chỉ là một cuộc ân ái sốc nổi. Qua điện thoại, Maya sắc bén tóm lấy nhịp thở đứt quãng của bạn mình, gặng hỏi xem liệu cô có đang bị ép buộc. Không khí quánh lại khi Riley ngoan, cố khẳng định đây là khát khao từ tâm hồn, dù biết sự trói buộc này quá đỗi độc hại, nhận ra sự thao túng, nhận thức chết người đó. Maya kiên quyết đòi biết tên thật của gã đàn ông. Khoảnh khắc ấy, thân thể Riley đông cứng. Cô thừa hiểu việc xướng tên một kẻ cai trị thế giới ngầm sẽ mở ra cánh cửa địa ngục. Bài học ở đây thật cay đắng, những ảo ảnh độc hại mà ta tự dối lòng để chấp nhận sẽ luôn vỡ vụn và không thể nào biện minh trước những người đang rơi nước mắt để cố gắng cứu rỗi linh hồn ta. Hãy cùng tôi quan sát sự vụn vỡ này. Đôi môi Riley run nhả ra cái tên Dante Caruso, vụng về lấp liếm bằng vỏ bọc của một đối tác kinh doanh. Maya gạt phăng đi. Đanh thép dọa sẽ dùng định vị đến tận nơi nếu bạn không nói thật. Bị dồn đến miệng vực, Riley cắn răng thừa nhận thân phận chủ Mafia của hắn. Sự im lặng nghẹt thở kéo đến trước khi Maya gào thét về bản chất máu lạnh của kẻ thù ác. Mặc cho Riley ngây thơ chống chế, Maya thẳng thừng vạch trần viễn cảnh cô sẽ bị nhai nuốt tàn nhẫn. Đôi mắt Riley mờ đi, mù quáng tin rằng mình là ngoại lệ duy nhất trong thế giới bạo tàn của hắn. Bài học thật sắc lạnh. Một tâm hồn yếu đuối rất dễ lầm tưởng kẻ giam cầm tàn độc nhất chính là bến đỗ bình yên. Tự thay dập tắt mọi hồi chuông cảnh báo sinh tồn trước khi bị bóng tối hoàn toàn nuốt chửng. Khung cảnh tĩnh lặng đến rợn người khi Riley thỏa hiệp với sự trượt dài của mình. Giọng cô đều đều, tuyệt vọng tô vẽ sự chiếm hữu bệnh hoạn của hắn thành lớp áo bào bọc dịu dàng khi nhắc đến đội vệ sĩ. Sự thật méo mó này xé toạc lý trí của Maya, khiến cô gào lên và nài bạn mình tháo chạy, nhưng đã quá muộn. Trong mắt Riley lúc này chỉ còn lại sự trống rỗng. Cô đứt gãy hoàn toàn về mặt tâm lý. Viện cớ quay lại hang ổ của ác thú chỉ để dọn vài món đồ. Trượt dài vào một dạng hội chứng Stockholm tăm tối, cô nhắm mắt gieo mình vào cơn nghiện cảm giác mạnh, ôm trọn lấy bóng tối của kẻ đi săn. Bài học đẫm máu là để níu giữ ảo tưởng về tình yêu. Đôi khi con người sẵn sàng đập nát mọi chiếc phao cứu sinh và mỉm cười bước thẳng xuống địa ngục. Tiếng bát đĩa lanh canh từ gian bếp sắc lẹm cắt ngang, bầu không khí căng như dây đàn. Riley này nỉ Maya hãy nhắm mắt tin tưởng cô một lần. Ở đầu dây bên kia, Maya đau đớn nhận ra sự quyến rũ chết chóc của gã Mafia đã nghiền nát lý trí của bạn mình. Đáp lại chỉ là tiếng cười lanh lành lạc lõng của Riley, một thanh âm bi kịch khi cô thừa nhận mình không muốn quay về với thế giới thực nữa. Cuộc gọi kết thúc hờ hững khi buông điện thoại. Lồng ngực Riley phập phồng vì kiệt sức, nhưng khóe môi lại nhếch lên khoái cảm của thứ tự do điên dại. Cô đã tự giam mình vào huyễn cảnh. Bài học trần trụi là sự tha hóa của một người chỉ thực sự hoàn tất khi họ sẵn sàng tàn nhẫn, điên cuồng bảo vệ kẻ thao túng mình trước những lời can ngăn rớm máu từ người thương yêu họ nhất. Máy quay chậm chậm lướt qua dáng vẻ mỏng manh của Riley, lúc này đang chìm nghỉm trong chiếc sơ mi của kẻ bắt cóc, một biểu tượng điện ảnh thầm lặng cho sự nuốt chửng hoàn toàn. Dante đứng bên bếp, những hình xăm vằn vẹn trên da hạt thịt hằn lên như một cuốn biên niên sử ghi lại sự tàn bạo. Khe giấu đi sát khí, hắn trượt ly cà phê về phía cô. Với độ ngọt và nhiệt độ được chuẩn bị một cách chuẩn xác đến từng chi tiết nhỏ nhất. Đồng từ Riley giãn ra, cô đã hoàn toàn bị đánh gục trước sự ân cần tới tinh tế của một tên trùm máu lạnh. Một bài học thao túng rợn người được phơi bày kẻ cất công ghi nhớ từng thói quen vụn vặt nhất của bạn trong bóng tối, thường lại chính là kẻ đang tỉ mỉ dệt nên một mạng nhện kiểm soát tàn độc, từ từ siết chặt và cướp đi sinh mạng của bạn. Lẫn trong tiếng leo xèo của chảo nóng, ánh mắt sắc lẹm của Dante dò xét thái độ của cô. Riley mấp máy, lặp lại lời phán xét của bạn mình về sự điên rồ mà cô đang vướng vào. Hắn nghiêng đầu, buông lời thử thách xem cô thực sự nghĩ gì. Ngước lên, với đôi mắt trống rỗng tê dại, cô gật đầu thừa nhận sự trượt dài của mình, mà chẳng còn lấy một tia sợ hãi. Hắn mỉm cười mãn nguyện, ban cho cô một cái vỗ về lạnh buốt. Bữa ăn tiếp nối dưới vỏ bọc gia đình êm ấm, nhưng ảo ảnh ấy nhanh chóng trong vỡ vụn. Dante buông nĩa, bóng tối ác thần trỗi dậy. Hắn thản nhiên ra lệnh phong tỏa toàn khu vực, chính thức giam lòng con mồi. Bài học cốt lõi là sự bình yên được ban phát từ tay một con quái vật chưa bao giờ là miễn phí. Nó luôn đi kèm với bản án tước đoạt tự do vĩnh viễn của chính bạn. Bạn và tôi nhận định phải bóc chân cái bẫy này. Bóng tối rủ xuống khi Dante dựng lên bức tường cô lập tuyệt đối. Hắn cử một sát thủ đến giám sát cô dưới mác bảo vệ, rồi bồi thêm đòn thao túng chí mạng buộc cô phải dọn đến ở chung. Ngay khi lý trí Riley trực chờ phản kháng, hắn tung mồi như là một căn phòng thiết kế riêng, liều thuốc tê hoàn hảo dập tắt mọi hoảng loạn. Hơi thở cô nghẹn lại trước tốc độ dồn dập này, nhưng đôi mắt đen thẳm của Dante không hề chớp, ghim chặt lấy con mồi. Hắn thì thầm biến sự kiểm soát độc quyền thành một màn kịch lãng mạn cuồng si. Bài học thật đáng sợ. Khi một kẻ thao túng đã nhắm trúng mục tiêu, hắn sẽ vứt bỏ mọi rào cản, lao đến đóng sập cánh cửa lồng sắt ngay trước khi nạn nhân kịp nhận ra bầu trời tự do của mình đã vĩnh viễn biến mất. Căng thẳng bóp nghẹt không gian khi hắn yêu cầu cô phải luôn ở trong tầm mắt. Bạn và tôi có thể dễ dàng nhận ra những hồi chuông cảnh báo đang gào thét trong đầu Riley. Cô biết rõ người đàn ông này là một mối nguy hiểm, nhưng lại chết lặng trước ảo ảnh che chở đầy mê hoặc mà hắn răng ra. Cô níu giữ chút quyền tự quyết, cô ngập ngừng xin phép được đến trường. Kẻ thao túng mỉm cười ân cần, ném cho cô một mẩu vụn tự do để nuốt trọn cả cuộc đời cô. Nhưng ngay khi cô vừa hé lộ ý định rời đi, không khí lập tức lạnh ngắt. Ánh mắt hắn sắc như dao, chém đứt mọi hy vọng. Bài học ở đây thật chua xót. Đôi khi thứ mà ta nhầm tưởng là vòng tay bảo vệ kiên cố nhất, thực chất lại chính là chiếc gông cùm tàn độc nhất, được ngụy trang cẩn thận để tước đoạt đi đôi cánh tự do. Hãy nhìn sâu hơn vào ngón đòn tâm lý tàn độc này. Hắn khoác lên mình phong thái điềm tĩnh đến rợn người, nhẹ nhàng tước đoạt đi từng chút lý trí cuối cùng của nạn nhân. Hắn gieo rắc ảo ảnh về sự tự do, thầm thì rằng hắn sẽ không giam cầm cô, nhưng lập tức thề sẽ săn lùng cô đến cùng trời cuối đất. Cô gái nhỏ ngây thơ tin rằng mình đang kìm cương được con thú dữ. Thế nhưng ẩn sau cái nhếch mép của hắn là một chiến thắng đã định đoạt. Hắn đang bứng rễ khỏi thế giới loài người. Sự thật nghiệt ngã ở đây là những nhà tù kiên cố nhất không được xây bằng song sắt lạnh lẽo, mà chúng được bện chặt bằng những lời mật ngọt, khiến nạn nhân tự nguyện dâng nộp chiếc chìa khóa sinh mệnh của chính mình. Trò chơi vần chuột tiếp tục bị đẩy lên mức cao, trao nghẹt thở, cố gắng tìm kiếm lối thoát trong vô vọng. Riley bám lấy căn phòng dành cho khách như một tấm khiên cuối cùng. Đáp lại sự kháng cự yếu ớt ấy là nụ cười săn mồi đầy thỏa mãn, một lời tuyên chiến không lời. Khi cô giày vạch trần mưu đồ thao túng của hắn, kẻ ác nhân điêu luyện đánh tráo mọi khái niệm. Hắn phù phép biến sự ép buộc thô bạo thành điệu vũ cuồng si, tô vẽ ham muốn chiếm hữu thành sự hy sinh cao cả. Bi kịch nhuốm màu đen tối khi cô ngoan ngoãn ngả đầu vào chính bàn tay đang trực chờ siết cổ mình. Chuyện này nhắc nhở ta một bài học thứ mà người đời thường ca tụng là sự tự tin ngạo nghễ, đôi khi lại là một cái bẫy chết chóc đầy tính toán. Một thỏi nam châm chuyên đi hút cạn sinh khí của những tâm hồn mong manh. Góc máy bất ngờ thay đổi, bắt trọn vẹn cái xoay người sắc lạnh của kẻ thao túng. Giọng hắn dầm xuống, bình thản ra lệnh cho cô ngồi ăn sáng để chuẩn bị rời đi. Sự lật mặt trơn tru từ đòn tra tấn tâm lý sang nhịp sống đời thường là ngón đòn cao tay nhất của một kẻ độc tài. Hắn bóp nghẹt mọi không gian tư duy, không cho cô, dù chỉ một giây để khóc thương cho cuộc đời vừa bị tước đoạt. Bữa sáng bình yên chỉ là vở kịch che đậy quá trình hắn nghiền nát ý chí độc lập của cô. Sự cam chịu lúc này đơn giản chỉ là bản năng sinh tồn xót xa. Bạn thấy đấy, những sự đầu hàng đánh mất nhân phẩm, đau đớn nhất, thường không hề nhuốm máu. Chúng chỉ lặng lẽ diễn ra đằng sau một buổi sáng tĩnh lặng, bên chiếc bàn ăn chứa đầy sự áp bức và nỗi sợ hãi tột cùng.